My question for you, Ethan, my next question for you, I should say, is, all right, you have Missouri State and Georgia Southern. You could also say Purdue. Purdue's like an in-conference cupcake. So really, you have this very soft early part of the season. The opposite of last year, right? You had LSU in the first game. You had Michigan on September 21st. So because you're able to ease into this season, so this is like 2023. They're having Nevada early on, San Jose
Rice
State.
was the first game.
Yeah. Stanford, when Stanford was horrible. So with the soft early schedule, there are really two schools of thought here. One is expose Jaden Maiava to everything. See what he can do, like put him in the full range of situations, like so that you get to see what works, what doesn't. You get to test things out. Like you have like a fun house, you can experiment. You're not likely to pay any sort of price. Maybe a little bit less so against Purdue because it's a road game and it's a conference game, but certainly for Missouri State and Georgia Southern, you could go with the thought process that, all right, Jaden, like we've practiced all summer. Let's see what you can do. You have the keys to the offense. We have faith in you. Like that's one thought process. That's one avenue. The other thought process, and I highly suspect this is what Jeff Rodriguez would endorse, is, all right, we have a new strength coach in town. Let's focus less on testing out our quarterback. Let's focus more on testing out our new strength coach, our new strength and conditioning program. Let's run the ball a bajillion times. Maiava throws the ball maybe 8 times against Missouri State. We're just going to pound the rock. We're just going to try and establish our standard. We're going to try and create a new identity of physicality. And the added benefit in this thought process, Ethan, and of course I'm going to ask for your input on this, is you can basically keep the playbook entirely under wraps. You can just go pure vanilla. You're just doing, student body right, late 1970s at USC, and you just kind of keep Maiava in the shadows. You're basically saying, hey, Jaden, like you don't need to be the hero right now. You need to learn about the offense, learn about the system. Like you do not need to put your body on the line. So like we're not going to run option plays either. We're going to hand the ball off. We're going to pitch the ball to our running backs against Missouri State and Georgia Southern for sure. And we're just going to play, slobber knocker football, and we don't give our opponents later in the season any sense of where this playbook is actually going to go. And so like kind of just to kind of plan ahead, like the Illinois game would be the first game under this thought process where the playbook opens up. Because I would say that Illinois is the first really tough game. It's not one of the 3 giant games, but like it's in that second tier right next to it. Like I think you can have a vanilla playbook and beat Missouri State, Georgia Southern, Purdue, and probably also Michigan State. We could quibble about Michigan State, but certainly the first 3 games. Like Purdue is absolutely atrocious. Even if Purdue is moderately better, that's still like going to be a 3-9 team. So, Ethan, do you see what Jaden Maiava can do right off the bat? Like give him a taste, let him learn from his mistakes against opponents who are not likely to punish him severely? Or do you keep it all under wraps and you just try and pound the rock and you wait until that midsection of the season, Illinois, Michigan, Notre Dame, to really open up the playbook and begin to expect more from Jaden Maiava, especially as a passer? What do you say?
I think you figured out exactly what Jeff Rodriguez is looking for. So you kind of had him figured out there. And he's, putting some more in the chat about he's not a pass hater. He just doesn't understand why the bright spot of your offense, when the bright spot of the offense was the run and not the quarterback that they throw 2-3 times in the red zone, which was a big frustration of mine against UCLA. Totally get you there, Jeff. I actually kind of agree with Jeff's last point here. They can air it out, but run at least 50% of the time. I kind of fall somewhere in the middle. I think that the way that Jaden Maiava is, you kind of by necessity have to test him out at least a little bit. I think he's not the kind of guy who has shown so much in-game situations that you're confident enough in him that he can kind of, take a back seat these first 4 games, and then immediately in Illinois, he's going to be ready to go. You have to kind of, with any player, you have to do this, but with him especially, he's a guy who I'm sure looks really good in practice and, has all this potential, all this athleticism. You don't really know exactly what you have until you trot him out there against other defenses that, he doesn't know it. That's not, the 11 guys that he competes against in practice every day. He definitely needs to be tested at least a little bit. I do think in those games and just in general, I think more of a reliance on the run would be super helpful. And I do think that with this offensive and defensive line, which we've talked about, they have a lot more size this year, but what they have gained in size, they don't have an experience. So letting those guys eat early, definitely a big fan of that idea. And also, I think a little bit in the run game, you're going to still be figuring out who the number one guy is. The running back room is just so deep this year, but there's not really a clear number one guy. Between Wayman Jordan and Eli Sanders and Brian Jackson, I could really see any of those 3 guys becoming the number one guy by the end of the year. So I think there's a real chance they're still figuring out who the number one running back is. And maybe there isn't a number one running back. Maybe it's more of a committee, based kind of situation that they use at USC this season. But
let me step in. Let me step in and ask you a pointed question about that precise point. Because here's the thing. With a number one back, like if you have the philosophy or you like just as a coaching staff, you arrive at the view that, hey, we need to be feeding this guy more than others. We have an RB1, we need to feed him. If you have that setup, like how significant an effect do you think that has on how Lincoln Riley and the staff manage the first few games, how they call plays, what their run pass mix is? And of course, we're putting this up against the alternative view. Let's do a committee. And if USC does do a committee, should it be, all right, we're going to have these guys as our first half backs, and then we're going to bring in the fresh reinforcements in the second half? Or are you spreading it around pretty evenly throughout a whole game? What would you say about those different possibilities, those different potential avenues for managing the running back room and running back snaps and play calls in the first 4 to 5 weeks of the season?
I think that my thoughts on how it will end up is more of the kind of the latter committee scenario where they're more mixed around kind of at different points during the game. I think with this running back room, you have a lot of potential. Wayman Jordan won essentially the Heisman in JUCO last year. And then Eli Sanders has been a great Mountain West running back. And then, Brian Jackson was a great high school running back, showed some flashes in the bowl game against A&M, but none of them are proven. It's kind of the same problem that we've talked about with the defensive line. That's another position group where this is really true. There's a lot of guys who are really big and seem like they have a lot of potential, but none of them are clear number one guys, like I said. So I think they also play to a bit of different strengths as well. I think Wayman Jordan seems like more of a traditional back. Eli Sanders is a guy you can get involved more in the pass game. Again, all of these guys have the potential to do all of these things, but I think it's going to be more, especially in these first few games, it's going to be more of like, hey, like if they decide to do a committee, I think we'll see a bit more of like, hey, let's throw these different guys in different situations, kind of keep them rotating in and out really quickly and just see, how Wayman Jordan does on 1st and 10, how Brian Jackson does on 3rd and short. And then, that'll kind of be the revolving door. I think though the games will give us a clue if there's a clear hierarchy, because I think if, it's kind of obvious if the second unit offense is trotting out there and, Hassan Longstreet is in the game, and then, Brian Jackson comes out alongside him, having not played at all in the first half, and that's a pretty clear indication that he's, lower on the depth chart than the other 2 guys. So I think if you're going to do a committee, you mix it up more. And I think that kind of should be their approach if they do the committee is that. I think that's a way that you can still keep guys fresh, but also kind of keep the defense guessing, like if they can kind of expect Wayman Jordan to be the only guy for the first half, then they can kind of, lock in and be like, okay, we're going to study this guy for the first half, and then we can expect him to be in the whole first half, and then we can defend the run this way. And then when, Brian Jackson comes in the second half, we can defend the run this way. Whereas if Lincoln Riley is consistently keeping the defense guessing and, putting them in the kind of mindset where they don't know what running back is going to run which specific play, especially in those first few weeks when, if you're still trying to figure it out, you're probably going to put guys in situations that they're not necessarily the strongest in, because you don't want to give teams like Illinois and Michigan indications of, if Brian Jackson is the guy on 3rd and short versus Wayman Jordan's the guy on 1st and 10, you don't want Illinois and Michigan to have that on tape. So maybe you throw them out there in the reverse scenario. And, just get them kind of, because you want, if all your backs are well-rounded, that's the best case scenario, obviously. So, yeah, I think, and that's just something also, I really hope that they kind of are okay with doing it a bit more as a committee, because I think in recent years, USC's had some really talented backs that they didn't really utilize. I see Jeff made a comment about how Quentin Joyner didn't have a single run for loss last year. Quentin Joyner was a guy who, when he had opportunities, showed a lot of talent. And for some reason, he just never got the ball. I mean, that was, a problem with the starting running backs as well, but even more so with some of these backup running backs. Like, we had these 5-star running backs. So yeah, just kind of, if we have as much talent in the running back room, mix it up a little bit more. Again, even if there is a clear number one guy, because there was clear number one guys these last 3 years, we had 3 great running backs in a row. And, this show knows my opinion on how all of those guys were underutilized. But even if they're, one of these guys separates themselves like that, I don't think there's any harm in letting the younger, less developed, guys that bring a little bit different stuff to the table run the ball a bit more.
All right. Really good discussion in the comments, guys. Jeff Rodriguez, Russ Campbell, Tafaf as well. Really good stuff, guys. One of the points that Russ Campbell makes, and he's alluded to this in some other comments as well along a similar line, but here he says, we definitely should have run the ball more, but our O-line was so erratic, it wasn't as simple as just handing the ball off 10 to 15% more. So, one of the things that Russ really identifies is that last year, USC had a lot of 10-yard carries and a lot of 0-yard carries. It was either feast or famine. It's not as though USC was getting 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. It was getting 0, 10, 0, 10, 0, 10. So the average was around 5, but it wasn't by getting 5 on each carry. It was not a consistent attack. And so really, Ethan, to me, one of the central play calling questions, dramas is, what happens if a 1st and 10 run gets stuffed and you have 2nd and 9? Does Lincoln Riley stick with the run on 2nd and long to try and get that thing established? It's obviously something he didn't do last season, and here's the nuance. With Miller Moss, not a running quarterback, the playbook was constrained. And so I'm sure Lincoln Riley felt for most of last year, 2nd and 9, we don't have a running quarterback. I need to throw. I need to have Miller Moss throwing on 2nd and 9 to get into 3rd and manageable, if not convert the first down. But I think with Maiava, you do have something different here. I think that, with Maiava, a running quarterback, having 3rd and 3, 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3, like that, not medium, not really short yardage. Having 3rd and 3 with Maiava feels different, Ethan, from 3rd and 3 with Miller Moss. And so, would that significantly change your view of how Lincoln Riley needs to view 2nd and 9 after a first down run gets stuffed? Is it because of Maiava, should that give Lincoln Riley the freedom to run on 2nd and long significantly more this year than he did last year?
Tafaf makes a really good point in the chat. You talked about people making good points, but he said Maiava didn't even get many running opportunities, though, which was a real head scratcher. Hopefully that's something that USC's been working on a lot this offseason, because, it doesn't really matter because when they made the switch from Miller Moss to Jaden Maiava, Jaden Maiava's biggest running highlight came in the week 2 cupcake game in garbage time. He didn't really get much opportunity to run the ball, at last year late in games. So they have to actually unlock that part of his game. And we don't know everything that's going on behind the scenes. Maybe Lincoln Riley was protecting him from injury, all that kind of stuff. But he's a young quarterback. He's never played in a big conference. He played at UNLV before, so lots of different things that were potentially going on there. Jeff in the chat says that his knee was an issue. That's very much possible. Regardless, this year that can't be an excuse anymore, and they need to get the run more involved. So I think yes, if they can actually get him running the ball, then that emboldens you to be a little bit more, to run the ball a little bit more on second down. I think also something that kind of popped into my head as you were talking about this was, I think situationally on drives, this kind of matters. I think there were times when, if it's second and long and, you're pinned deep in your own territory and you haven't gotten a first down yet on the drive, maybe you don't, want to run the ball. So you get pinned back for a third and long, and then, you go 3 and out without really gaining any yards and have to punt. But if it's like, I think what frustrated me was when, they run the ball and it doesn't go anywhere on first and goal. And then they, throw twice on plays that, play designs that don't really make any sense. And then they, try to kick a field goal. Maybe Michael Lance misses it because he wasn't a great kicker last year or whatever. But that was the most frustrating to me. So I think I would just, I don't think that there's a clear scientific answer to whether, Lincoln Riley is going to run the ball more on second down, if that's wise every time. But I think on a case-by-case basis, I would just like to see, more situationally him running the ball on second down if he can afford it. Like if you're already in opponent territory, if you're already, within field goal range, the kicking game should be a lot better. Last year, they got a guy who was, one of the Mountain West Freshman of the Year, was an incredible kicker at UNLV. So he should be hopefully better than Michael Lance was. But I think hopefully that can be relied on, and in those situations you see a little bit more, hey, let's trust these guys to run the ball. If you're still trying to pass because it's 2nd and 11 on your own 24-yard line, then I wouldn't fault him for that, because you don't want to go 3 and out without ever trying to throw the ball, or put Maiava in a situation where it's like 3rd and 9 and he has, and the defense knows he's throwing the ball and there's no other real option there. But so yeah, I think just situationally I'd want to see a little bit more of an awareness there of trusting the running backs in situations where it makes sense.
Yeah, I think that like there are some ambiguities and there are some really good debates to have, but I think there's zero debate among the entire USC fan base. You get 1st and goal at the 5, you're hammering that rock. You're staying with it at least on 1st and 2nd. We can talk about 3rd, but 1st and 2nd, you need to be hammering it certainly instead of a second down fade pass, like we saw way too many of those. So no question about that. And also there were times last season where USC gets into 2nd and 4, 2nd and 3, like 100% of the time, or like 99% of the time, you need to be running the ball on 2nd and 4, 2nd and 3. And the thing we haven't yet brought up here is that, if you're running the ball and you don't have maximum elite depth on defense, you need to be running the ball, if not just, to save your quarterback some work, but also shorten the game, fewer plays, make sure your defense gets to rest as much as possible. That's another dimension to running the ball. And so, USC did not have elite defensive depth last year. That's another reason why Lincoln Riley bailing on the run game, especially in the red zone, was so angering, because he should have been shortening the game, reducing the exposure level for his defense. Like that is another piece of the puzzle. And so, like if you have the 1985 Chicago Bears, hey, you can take risks on offense. You don't need to worry about shortening the game because you have the best defense ever created on your side. But if you don't have the elite depth, if you don't have the very, very best, if you don't have an absolute juggernaut, you need to protect your defense. and that means running the ball to shorten the game. Certainly if the scoreboard is neutral or favorable. And it was usually neutral or favorable. USC led in the fourth quarter of nearly every game last season. So not trusting the run game from that vantage point, also a real failure. So really interesting conversation, guys. Jeff Rodriguez, Russ Campbell, Tafaf, really good dialogue tonight. Ethan and I thank you for that.